Hi.
Hi. How are you doing tonight?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good, doing good. I just rushed in. So I am settling my nervous system coming into the room.
Mm-hmm.
How about
Yeah.
yourself? How was your evening?
Good, good. Today's more of my admin day, so I don't see clients on Thursdays.
That's nice.
Yeah, so I've been at home feeling the heat from the outside.
Yes, yes. I am so thankful that the winter is over, and summer is here, but I'm like, okay, back to the sweltering sweat.
Right.
You know? But thank you. We'll get started as people come in.
Yes.
Thank you all for being here. We are having our third conversation in the Village Voices series centered on Black maternal health and honoring Black Maternal Health Week. This
Yes.
conversation is with my guest, Janelle, who is here to chat with me about birth trauma in the body and what mothers carry after. I'll let you first kind of talk a little bit about yourself and
Mm-hmm.
your clients and the work that you do, and why this particular topic is, of importance to you.
Yeah. So one, thank you for having me here. So I'm Janelle Coleman. I'm a licensed therapist based in New York City and New Jersey. I see clients through the journey to parenthood. So, starting dating, trying to conceive through postpartum and early parenting. I'm also EMDR trained. I consider myself a trauma therapist. EMDR is a trauma therapy modality. And I also have a background in doula work. So, I consider myself a birth worker. I I'm also a health educator, ASEX certified sexuality educator specifically. And Black Maternal Health Week is so important to me. Especially because I've been interested in birth since high school, honestly, and just from the justice perspective, the lack of access perspective, believing that women and birthing people should have education about what it means to have the birth that they want and birth that they deserve, and that led me to become a doula. And also as a Black woman, and we often hear the disparities and the statistics around us being three times as likely to die during childbirth, and also the other many really devastating statistics around our health and our health specifically around birth. And then also being a birth trauma survivor myself, this is just deeply personal to me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that little bit of your story, and also why this work is so important, right? Like the stats are there, but the stories are also like what we want to make sure is centered, right? Like that's why these
Mhm.
types of conversations are important. Our moms in this particular community are facing so many systemic issues, and on top of that, not necessarily having the support and the resources available, and
Right.
so organizations like Black Mamas Matter and
Mhm.
like the Sister Song and like So Well Here, like our goal
Mhm.
is really about bringing around that awareness. And so this conversation is important, it's essential. And I wanted to kind of start off by kind of talking about our main topic and what birth trauma is, and like how do we
Mhm.
define that? How would you define that as you've seen it with clients or in your
Mhm.
own personal story?
Yeah, so trauma itself is when there's a past experience that is coming to the present. And what that means is mentally, physically, emotionally, that past experience results in symptoms like having physical symptoms, maybe headaches, chronic pain. It can look like uh, emotional symptoms, anger, resentment, being easily agitated, very tearful. It can look like having negative thoughts about yourself and beliefs about yourself. And then birth trauma specifically is connected to the birthing experience. And that can be caused by having a very long labor or rapid labor. It can cause by hemorrhaging or uh, having difficulty with medical staff. So something that many of us experience just going to the doctor, right? Having
Mhm.
that during your labor and delivery. not being listened to in the birth space, having even after during postpartum experience, having long lasting physical effects like incontinence or tearing that's showing up and interrupting your life in different ways. And so that trauma is like some you typically aren't getting over it, right? It's the
Mhm.
experience that you're not getting over. It's showing up in different ways and often subconscious ways. Not you're sitting there, you may not necessarily have a flashback, but you may notice that you're being triggered by things, and that's causing you to have big reactions or even internal reactions, somatic reactions.
Yeah. Why do you think that it's hard for for moms or birthing individuals to why do you think it's hard for them to notice, right, that this is actually something that may be stemming from a trauma that they experience?
Yeah, a lot of what birthing people are experiencing, it's normalized. Like I said, we many of us go to the doctor, deal with the medical space, and it's normalized to have an unfortunate experience to have someone sit with you for 5 minutes and then leave when you have
Right.
questions, right? And so a
Right.
lot of that is a part of many of our lived experiences. And so when someone experiences some levels of birth trauma, they're questioning like, is this should I be upset about this? Should I still be holding on to this? Because a lot of that is normalized. And then there's a lot of shame around trauma in general. A lot of what is spoken about or not spoken about uh, existing for many of us. And there aren't safe spaces within our social networks to even have conversations about harmful or challenging experiences. And also, specifically with birth trauma, for those who have living children, right? You have the baby, and many people are excited about the baby, and the focus is on the baby. The focus is less on the person who just gave birth. Like, yeah, there may be some considerations around, like, oh, I want to help you with the baby, or I want to, acknowledge that you did this thing, but then the focus is on, yay, the baby's here. We're so grateful the baby's here. And it can often be hard for people to bring both together. Like I had a really terrible birth experience, and also I'm grateful that this baby's here. I'm excited that I have a new baby. And also the reality that postpartum is very difficult, right? Like there's sleep is interrupted. Being able to just practice basic self-care is interrupted, and so it can be difficult to also say, like, okay, I need to take a shower and eat a healthy meal, and I need to process this wild birth experience I just had.
Yeah, yeah. Those are really great definitions and I think the way that you explain like how maybe showing up, and the one thing that stood out to me that what you were saying is like the language, right? This the reason that we're doing Maternal Health Week, right, is the Black part of it, right? Like we
Hmm.
stay there because of the
Hmm.
language is not there and it's not necessarily given. And so it's
Hmm.
important to have culturally affirming care, right? Like in the hospital spaces, in the doula spaces, and in the therapeutic space as well. How can you talk a little bit about how maybe you're showing up in a culturally affirming way when
Hmm.
parents, birthing individuals, moms, whomever are coming into the space and like, oh my God, this is what's going on with me. How do you show up in that way?
Yeah, it's important to know the full birth story. People have different backgrounds and what it means to even be a mother, what they're bringing into that space, like what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a parent for them, based on their history, based on their lineage, their culture, and that's all coming into the birth experience. And so I want to understand what that is, and I understand even if there's another Black woman across from me, I don't know exactly what it means for her to be a mother. And so
Mhm.
I want to understand where even that desire, what that desire means for her in this context, and have just a better understanding of how she may have imagined pregnancy, giving birth, and parenting in the context of culture and her own history and background.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I want to move into like the identity part, right? The identity part, which is like, okay, moms have had a traumatic birth experience. Like, how do you have seen, like in your spaces, how that shapes what a mother sees about herself or her experiences in motherhood, right? As this is the beginning of their motherhood
Hmm.
journey, right? Like, what do you see coming up or your perspective?
Yeah, so trauma can really interrupt our the beliefs we have about ourselves. Like some people go into the birth experience with a plan, like a solid birth plan, the team, right? The works.
Mhm.
Like the you have the doula, the postpartum doula, the lactation consultant, all the people, you have your full team, and then that can get interrupted. And
Right.
especially if you're someone who is in the field, right? We have seen people who are in the field having terrible birthing experiences. And that
Hmm.
can really shift your identity because you are now going from, oh, I'm prepared, I'm knowledgeable, I'm doing all the things to maybe I didn't do the right things. Maybe I
Right.
didn't check all the boxes. Maybe the one provider who I chose was actually a terrible provider and I should have done better. And I failed. And
Right.
those and some of those thoughts are not necessarily conscious thoughts that we're saying to ourselves, like in the mirror, like I'm a failure, but they're
Right.
showing up in our bodies, right? In our
Hmm.
reactions to other parts of our life, maybe even the parenting part, like the hyper vigilance around being a parent, like maybe being nervous around about how your child is doing, being having anxiety about leaving your child with other people because now that trust is also interrupted. You may not trust other people to even take care of your child because of a birth trauma, and so it shifts really like a lot of that identity piece around like who am I in this context after I've experienced such a difficult thing.
Yeah. Yes. I saw someone say trauma is trying to gaslight us 100% of the time. That is what trauma is doing. And as you were talking about that, it actually like kind of reminded me about my own experience. Right. I was raising my hand because I was like, I had the plan. I was like, this is my birth plan. Let me give it to the doctor. Like, like everyone's prepared, but life had other expectations. My son had other expectations. Right. And he had other plans, and things were a little different, right? And I had to take time to process that. And then I've also had women in the room who, experienced birth trauma, and that connection with their child has been impacted, right? They're
Hmm.
not able maybe to see their child immediately after, so they're losing that skin to skin and that
Hmm.
immediate connection with their child, and then postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety starts to kick in. They've lost that connection from the birth trauma, and so then they become disconnected from the child, maybe disconnected from. See, am I back now?
Hi. Yes,
Hi.
yes.
Okay. Yes. Sorry, someone called me. So I'm saying that they feel disconnected from their bodies. They feel disconnected from themselves, and they come into the space, and the work and the counseling space is really about helping them, name and identify what's going on, how it's showing up, but then also like navigate through that. When you have someone showing up with trauma,
Hmm.
right, in your space, how are you helping them navigate? Heal, get through. What's your process?
Yeah. Well, one, I want to name that healing isn't linear, right? And sometimes when people come to therapy, especially in the beginning of the work, they are hoping for like this outline of like, okay, if I do X, Y, Z, I will be healed. I can move on. I can stop paying for this. And that's not exactly how it works. And so, one to name that, like, it's a journey. And as we progress through life, there will be things that happen that may trigger us in new and different ways, and we may need to revisit the skills and the tools in new and different ways. And so, when working with trauma, one, it's developing a toolbox. But before we even get to that part, like let's talk about the basics of self-care and having needs met. And
Hmm.
what does that look like for you? For some people on a daily basis, they're not even able to drink enough water. They don't have adequate time to take a full shower without rushing, or they're disconnected from the things that they once enjoyed, or even spending time with family and friends, right? And so let's start there. Like, what are you having difficulty even accessing this level of care for yourself? And then what does support look like, especially for parents in general, but new parents who are taking care of a small baby? Do you have enough support to do this big task, to uh, manage this big responsibility? Because if we're going to start processing, metabolizing trauma, and you don't even, like, we're talking about therapy, right? Like, even 45 minutes, you can't even access that because you don't have childcare, you don't have like, maybe your partner works long hours and can't be there. Like, there's a deficit here that needs to be addressed, and how that's showing up for a person. And then we can, once we have more management of that, we can talk about this toolbox. And that can look like grounding tools, such as, often people in therapy know about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is essentially like paying attention to your surroundings, being present.
Right.
When you're activated, especially having trauma symptoms, you may dissociate or have a disconnection from your body or the present, because you're going back to that past memory. So the grounding to support with reminding yourself where you are in present time. And that can look like just being aware of your surroundings, naming what you're seeing, naming what you are hearing, smelling, etc. Literally planting your feet on the ground is helpful
Mm-hmm.
for some people. Laying on the ground is helpful. I connect with water, so I'm someone who, obviously, I can't get to an ocean every day. That would be lovely.
Right.
But for some people, even running their hands underwater can reconnect them to their body in the present moment, can provide a sense of relaxation. And what we're talking about with healing is addressing the activation that's occurring when you are out of that window of tolerance, which is essentially that window that allows you to do things without being activated. So maybe you're someone who goes more into that hyper arousal space, where you're maybe more angry, or you're on edge a lot. Your heart rate increases, or maybe you're in that hypoarousal space where you numb and you dissociate. So the work is supporting clients being able to tolerate stressors and not get into those spaces, or be able to manage the symptoms that come up, so that they are able to do their life without being activated.
Yeah, yeah. And you bring up such a valid point, right? And that makes me think about like trauma in general, right? Oftentimes it's sneaky, right? You're completely doing something, you're in the middle of your day, you're washing dishes, whatever, driving, and it just sneaks up on you, right? And the work that you're doing in the room is really about, like you said, like, how do we address it when it comes up, and like, how can we move forward? Like, how can we do something different, right? If they
Mhm.
come into the room and they're like, every time I'm in free state, our work is really about how do we make a how do we settle ourselves like in our bodies to
Mhm.
then make a different decision. So I think you bring up a really good point. I see we have a question that says, what can clinicians do to make birth trauma less traumatic?
Yeah, that's a great question. We know this system, it's awful. Just historically, right? Like, it's not even just now. Like, historically, it's been unsupportive and harmful and violent towards Black women. And what can we do? Like, clinicians, if one, need to listen and have time, think about specifically when you go to the OBGYN, like, having time to answer questions, being trauma informed. So having an awareness, because birth is so intimate. Like, getting a pap smear is so intimate, and you don't know it's important for clinicians to know who's in the room. They don't know, and they don't ask questions about someone's trauma history, and what may, or be curious about it in a way that can be supportive in providing in providing care and providing that trauma informed care, being up to date on what's happening for the populations that they are working with, what that can look like, holistically, to for that person to feel safe and secure when receiving care, and also supporting with accessing resources. Right, sometimes there's such a gap in knowledge when it comes to like what is available. Like some people are
Right.
learning for the first time when they are experiencing incontinence, like, oh, pelvic floor therapy exists. Like,
Yeah.
why isn't this part of the education that's provided by clinicians during the first trimester? And so, really starting from like, even me having the background as an educator, I'm like, I don't think people should know about birth when they're trying to have a baby. Like, to me, that's
Hello.
wild. It's like, why are we just now learning about this when you're like, oh, I'm trying to conceive, like, what are these parts and what are they doing and why are they not working? Like, this education needs to start way earlier than that. I mean, there's some adult people who don't understand how their menstrual cycle works, right? And so there's just a lot of education that's missing foundationally when it comes to the body. And a lot of our medical providers can support in increasing that access for their patients.
Yeah, right. The work is really like we can do that in session with the client. I think, like you said, giving them the information, naming what's coming up. Like you said, a lot of people are not even aware, right? How can we actually work together as a village, right? We should have our OBGYNs and our GYNs working with our, psychologist or the counselor
Mhm.
or this, like, like we should be in this collective community space so that moms can actually get the care that they're needing, not when the problem actually occurs, but
Right.
before. How can we be
Hmm.
preventative, right? As opposed to waiting for something to happen and then responding and acting, and then having to get activated. We should be preparing beforehand. And I love that you mentioned, just like, as a clinician, informing yourself, right? Like, finding out in the community, maybe in the area, like, what are some community maybe that.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Uh, Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, sorry.
it's
I was
okay.
just saying that I think you bring up a really valid point, that clinicians, it's important for them to really have knowledge and awareness, right, of how they can support their clients, right? If you're in New York City, like, have a list of resources and places that they can go to get
Hmm.
support or to learn about new moms. Are there any postpartum support groups that you can link them up to? Us having that knowledge in that space, right, as clinicians, even as sister, friends, cousins, whoever, like, if we're supporting
Yeah.
birthing individuals, like, having resources is so valuable and so key. We have
Hmm.
another question, which just kind of like talks to my last point, which was, what ways can friends and families constructively support someone who has had a birth trauma?
Yeah, that is a great question because often, especially, I categorize this into the like disenfranchised grief area, meaning that these are levels of loss that can go unnoticed. And with birth trauma, even with a living child, there is loss because it's loss of the vision you had of the birth and what you thought it would be. And with that, a lot of that lives in the shadows, right? There, you're experiencing this alone. And so part of the support looks like, if you know that someone has experienced a level of birth trauma, being present with them and checking in on them. Because again, like, having a baby is so exciting for not only the individual, but the family unit and the extended family. And so the focus is typically there, but checking in on the new mom, the new parent, and asking, like, okay, how was that for you? Is there any way I can support? Anything you want to talk about? Just being a listening ear. For me, that was so important, just having people who I knew would listen, right? They're not trying to solve problems. They're not trying to get me to run away from my feelings. They're just there to listen and be present. And that's so important because often with the shame of experiencing traumas, the thoughts we have in our head about what we did wrong, and what we could have done better. We need supportive people that can kind of support with quieting that noise and not trying to get us to forget that it happened because it did happen, but support in the processing and sense of validating the feelings that came up around it.
Yeah, yeah, this is so good. And that's how you actually show up in community. That's how that's how village care is created, right? By being that support system. Um, is there anything that you're seeing in the clients that are coming to see you now? Anything that's coming up related to the society, the politics, the world? There's a
Mm,
lot happening right now. There's a lot of traumatic experiences. People are living in chronic stress, right?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, so anything that you're seeing like in your therapeutic space?
Yeah, well, that comes up a lot, just trying to figure out what is acceptable as far as reacting to what's going on, and being able to validate the strong emotions, even when maybe other people around them, say at work, aren't they aren't having big reactions to the world. And especially when we think about being Black women, like in spaces, sometimes we're the only in spaces, and we can
Yeah,
see things that happen to us or maybe other people of color and feeling it so deeply in our bodies, but other people around us are maybe on the surface are like, this is bad, but they're like not as impacted or may not be targeted in the same way. And yeah, so that shows up a lot in sessions, just like feeling, wanting to feel safe in the therapy space can be that space for people to share how they're feeling, to be honest about what's coming up, honest about the anger, right? Especially as Black women, anger is so stigmatized. We are taught in some ways to hide that anger because of stereotypes, and so it can feel uncomfortable to even express that when it's appropriate to be anger at the state of the world because it's completely messed up. And
right,
so if you're not angry, actually, I'm concerned. And so I say that to clients. I'm like, the feelings you have, like, I think we would have another conversation if you didn't have them,
right,
because to be angry, to be upset, to feel dysregulated in this world context makes sense.
right,
Those are
right.
appropriate reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so validating to come into a space where you're able to have that conversation and can bring that up. And so the clinician's jobs right here in this particular instance is that validation and being able to hold that conversation. Bringing it back to like the birth trauma aspect, right? And naming what's being carried, right? Why do you think that moms don't recognize that what they're carrying is trauma, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like, why do you think that, they may not even just be aware that it's actually something that they're experiencing?
Yeah, with awareness, it requires language and education about those feelings. And often these traumatic experiences that I named earlier are not new things, but they are experiences that I think about just our family and our just a family context that they're not spoken about. And so it can be difficult to recognize what's happening on a physical level, to connect maybe your chronic headaches to the fact that there's